Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 364 on Jackparsons, actually. Another figure within the occult, and I will deem him a genuine occultist, by the way. I'll get into specifically why. He was a member of the OTO, communicated frequently with Crowley. He was also a contemporary of L. Ron Hubbard, and it was funny because in some correspondence, Crowley apparently preferred Hubbard and the way he did things, and he goes off to create Scientology, and the rest is history. A little bit of a psychodrama there, some creative writing, almost like the founding of Mormonism. I could recount the entire life of Jackparsons here, but I think that that's probably already been done. So I'll just give a brief sort of run-up to this. Jackparsons is a figure from the early part of the 20th century, and he was a literal rocket scientist. Died at the age of 37 in a lab explosion. They're still not sure whether it was accidental, homicide, or suicide. Given that they were unable to establish this, and given that he was involved with both occult orders and with a false claim of espionage against him, as well as fucking around and finding out with some rural industrialists, I have a feeling that he was probably murdered and that it was covered up. I think they found him to be problematic. He was one of the pioneers of the rocket program in the United States with regards to the use of liquid fuel. Whenever you see a Minuteman missile, you're seeing a little bit of Jackparsons. I'm sure he would be very pleased with this development, considering that it could be instrumental in literally ending the world in nuclear fire. I wanted to analyze, though, more a little bit of the personality side and also the synchronicity between the way in which he entered and exited occult orders and lived the last few years of his life especially, with several other individuals, because I think that there are several common themes. The first is his idealism. He was a hedonistic, proto-hippie sort, almost a Beat Generation sort of figure. Again, he was fairly young when he died, when he was cavorting around with artists and anarchists and screwing people's wives and having his screwed by L. Ron Hubbard, which he did not apparently like, by the way, which is hilarious. During this period, he developed a fairly individualistic theme to the way in which he lived his life. It was basically fucking leave me alone, I just want to do crazy shit. The fact that he was mixing chemicals all day and dealing with things that could easily vaporize him shows that sort of almost Promethean, sort of the rebellious devil-may-care streak in him. And what I came to the conclusion of when I was studying Jackparsons is that he was a true occultist in that sense. He was a voracious learner, extremely academically talented, probably a literal genius IQ-wise. And he wanted something beyond the chemicals that he was mixing and the rockets that he was helping build and stuff like that. That's all very fascinating. He went beyond that and he wanted more. And so he delved into spirituality. And what I think is this: the best kind of occultist is someone who starts off with that desire to learn and ends up applying it to the spiritual while also applying it to the very secular, and their mind gets working and can make connections between things that other people would not see. It's fortunate if they end up in an initiatory order. Again, I'll give a couple of examples of similar characters and similar orders. And it's also even more fortunate if they then depart from the main line of that order and continue on with their work. Parsons was engaged with numerous experiments on his own accord, long and various other schemes, like trying to sell yachts or some shit like that at one point. Got defrauded, actually, possibly part by Hubbard, and then go on to greater, bigger things. This is sort of what happened with me. I've always had that academic spirit. I've always been interested in science and reading and history and all of these other things. Mathematics, a little bit less so. Depends on the kind of math you're talking about. I ended up in Satanism. I didn't join the Church of Satan or anything, although I was fundamentally familiar with its doctrines and other groups as well, and then realized that it was vacuous, and then filled it with my own accord. Now, I credit the fact that I was born a liberal Christian as opposed to a fundamentalist. I'll tell you why. I've seen a million cases of people, including many that I've talked to, where a person, their personality has led them towards fervor. They've been raised up in a fervent community of Christians, Hindus, Jews, whatever, very orthodox, very believing, or anti-religious. Atheism effectively can accomplish the same thing. And what I think happens is that even if they're the rebel kid of the family and they don't show an active interest, they see their parents and their community constantly rolling their eyes whenever some other religion, or if they're an atheist, whatever religion in general, spiritual topics, etc., even things that are only scantily related to it are brought up. And so if they do end up switching sides, if the kid raised by hardline Dawkins atheists becomes a Christian, what do? They join the most fire and brimstone church that they can, and they end up becoming the goddamn preacher because the preacher realizes that they're outclassed. The person has the drive, but their personality has been warped to the degree where they're incapable of exiting the mode of thinking that has led to the fervor. So they're incapable of generally regarding spirituality and experimenting and so forth because of fear, because of their fervency. In some cases, you get people who deviate from this, and this is why these initiatory orders, even though I'm not a member of any of them, even though I do not espouse some of the beliefs that they have, I recognize them as, at least in the psychodramatic sense, important. I've said this about Satanism, and I continue to do so. If you wish to purge yourself of false guilt and fear, the psychodrama and the ritualism of these orders can help. I realize that that only loosely applies to theosophy, but we'll get through that. With Jackparsons, we see a person whose core fundamental aspect is individualism and a lust for learning. When a person like that goes into an initiatory order, therefore, they're capable of promoting and refining their own individualism. It's almost Epicurean. You would say, well, I'm a rugged individualist. I have mine, fuck you. Then you refine that and you realize, why do I want all of the things that I want? Why the fuck am I sitting here busting ass for a sports car? Well, you know, the joy that it gives me, that adrenaline rush, probably won't last very long. I wouldn't even have a road to ride it on. Hey, why don't I take that money and build a massive-ass survival garden instead? Well, everyone has benefited. You've certainly benefited. You saved money, and now you've got your own food and can learn a million other skills related to that. The Epicurean, the adage basically, is the Epicurean can get as much joy out of a cup of warm water and a loaf of bread that the average person would from a lavish feast. It's a refining of things. Parsons does not appear to have gone to the length, maybe because he died so young, that he was able to refine his hedonism towards women in this way, but seems to have been very much content to do his experiments and fundamentally fuck off and live semi-off the grid and be left alone. I do not believe he was involved in espionage, just to be clear. That was cleared up. It was investigated by the Red Scare people of the day. He seems to have been quasi-libertarian, and so that's definitely respectable. There are plenty of tales of him doing all manner of different rituals. Now, normally you wouldn't think of a rocket scientist, probably with an IQ in the 150 plus range, as being the sort of person to engage in superstition and the paranormal and things. I ask, why not? The Nazis certainly did when they were developing their rocket programs, at time at the Vimana and shit like that. Now, the synonymous characters that I identified, number one would be Rudolf Steiner. Steiner also had this extreme academic drive towards a search for truth. He became a theosophist, and theosophy was working well for a while for him. He made many works detailing theosophy and talking about different principles and so forth, and doing his work. Theosophy eventually became more socio-political, more Eastern-geared, almost anti-Western at times under Besant. Rudolf Steiner said fuck you and fucked off, formed anthroposophy, the Waldorf school system, and became much, much more well-known and powerful than Annie Besant ever became. I see that as a successful transformation. The initiatory step to purge the mind of the old dross worked. He had that central character, that ingrained lust for truth and for academic knowledge, and applied it then to the spiritual. Success. Zeena Schreck would be another example. She was, of course, the daughter of Anton LaVey. She's now, I believe, Zeena LaVey again, by the way, by surname. I don't know if she changed it back after their apparent divorce about 10 years ago. She was raised up in Satanism, never was raised up with the false guilt and fear, so she had that advantage, is intelligent and overall rational, and left Satanism behind because it's vacuous, it's an atheistic system when you were talking about LaVeyan Satanism, and then built upon the fact that there's a lack of the holding back in the sense of fear or anger or guilt, and went off to search the Setian path, at first with a Kino, actually, with the Temple of Set, left that within a few years, I think, over administrative difficulties, if I remember the case, and you know, adopted sort of the psychodrama aspect, number one. Kino was in Army Intel and PsyOps for a reason. And then went off to study Buddhism, Setianism, paganism in general, and all these other things. Now does a lot of animal welfare, so Buddhist retreat and animal welfare stuff. She has found her new reality, and similarly, that was made possible by that particular upbringing at that particular time. I would point out that virtually all of these different orders, at some root source, are highly individualistic. LaVey effectively plagiarized Might is Right by Ragnar Redbeard. It's a libertarian manifesto in the vein of Ayn Rand objectivism. I don't agree with everything that it says, but fundamentally its principles are sound. Parsons with the OTO. Again, there was a great deal of hedonism. Even if that aspect was psychodramatic and in some cases used as an excuse for perversion, it does help to slowly purge the self of guilt and fear, which Parsons appears to have had an advantage of because he doesn't appear to have had it to begin with very much. Wicca would be another great example. When we look at Gardnerian literature, effectively it's just taking older, in some cases anthropologically derived, tales of witch cults and creating a sort of psychodrama there too, with a lot of boobies and dancing around the fire. It can be very positive. It should be seen mainly as an initiatory step. Many people get trapped in it, and this is what happens to 99% of people within the occult. They will end up in an order, or not being in an order, but being within an ideology, and they won't search further. There's no initiatory preparation. There's no initiatory step. Some of the secret societies, like the Masons, seek to avoid this actively, insofar as they still exist. The Rosicrucians, certain other orders. So I just thought Jack Parsons is an interesting character. It's too bad he got blown up, although again, he lived fast, he died fast, he did what he wanted to do. He was devil-may-care, he was screwing other people's wives up until the end, which he considered to be a great thing. Definitely a true occultist after one sense of the word. And certainly a true libertarian, which is why the government tried to attack him so frequently. That's about all. Peace out.